I'm in my hacker code here.
Oh wow, nice.
Punch that in, and it just sits there and runs for like 20 minutes because it's just a memory monitor. It's just displaying every memory value from 0000 to FFFF, which is 64. No, the 5Fs.
Oh.
Whatever that comes out to.
16 times 64.
Hexadecimal math. Eventually, it's just going to get to where it just says like 0 because you've gone past MMIO, you've gone past whatever we support. So yeah, this is we need to film something for CSI New York. they need to make it look like something as important is happening in the background.
1 megabyte.
1 megabyte. 1 megabyte. That's what 5S is.
If I've done the math in my head correctly.
I'm glad somebody else is smart. That's a lot. Yeah, eventually it's just going to get to a point where it just says, what are you doing? There's nothing there.
You should have it just, randomly just write values in it. Just see what happens.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the OS, whatever of the OS loaded it's going to display, which is interesting. Every once in a while you can see it says, well, that was hello, that was X hello, so that was the hello program that you wrote. So. And then we get to these fun blocks of 00s and FFs. And then it goes back and finds something. I watched this for like 15 minutes the other day.
Did you find the answer to the universe in there?
No, but one of the things that's interesting is that, let's see if I can get this right. The 8th bit, so it's 7-bit ASCII, but the 8th bit is always on. So anytime you pull off like the actual hexadecimal data code, you throw it into like a hex editor, it comes up as garbage. Like you can't read any of it. So we had to write like custom programs that stripped the 8th bit.
I wonder if
so we could read it.
If that might have been for some weird backwards compatibility with like a stick or something.
Or it could have been backwards compatibility with tape drives or something, because they initially started with tape drives. So like one of the big things that Centurion marketed was that they were able to, they said, hey, we can update your entire, whatever it is you're doing, CPA office, off of the old Lytton tape drives that are slow onto our fancy Hawk drive that is extremely fast. But we still have backwards compatibility with all of that old stuff, and we have a card that you can plug into the backplane and access all that data. So you can plug this card into the backplane, pull your data off of a mega slow streamer tape, and put it onto one of the 5 megabyte platters, and you have far more room, and it's far faster. So that was like one of the big things, but that was because of that, they ended up with being stuck saddled with 400 byte sectors, because that was what the primary data that they were trying to remain backwards compatible with was using. And they used 400 byte sectors all the way up into about 1986 or 87. And that was when some shady stuff happened in the history of the company. And then they switched over to 512 byte sectors. I don't know, have we started? Are we streaming? Like, should I start at the beginning? I don't know. I feel like there would be a go. Is that
no?
on?
It's on, but
is it on?
I'm not in charge of it.
It says stop.
All right, I guess we're going. I don't know. Maybe somebody out there in charge will go and say. I tell you what, I'll get a picture of it in the process. I brought this is how much of a nerd I am. I brought my own notebook. Would you buy a used car from those gentlemen?
I have bought a used car from them.
Yeah. Did you left with your life, so it was okay.
Yeah.
My God.
Those are the sketchiest looking group of people I've ever seen in my life. Right?
Frankie
That's the guy who created this company, John Rex Warren, and Bud Smith next to him is his brother-in-law.
So what year was that?
This is 72, 73, something like that. Just put that right there. Tell you what, before I get too deep into it, let me double check that it's okay to start. Let me call Ken in here, because he's going to have better insight.
The black leather looks like their fixer.
Yeah, they're going to introduce me. apparently. Shows how little I'm paying it. Well, I looked around and it said stop on it, like it was doing something. So.
Yeah, it's doing something. So this is mostly just to test the audio.
Around and it said stop on it, like it was doing something. Yeah, it's doing something. This is mostly just to test the audio.
And apparently it's working.
Yes. See how long that was.
Okay.
Was that jumping the OS or?
It's just dumping the memory. I started at 00000 and went to 5Fs. Which, I mean, it's only got 128K in it, so eventually it's going to run out. I don't know what 128K is what in hexadecimal. You're now my hexadecimal math guy, by the way.
Hey, I did not volunteer for this.
You did when you said 1 megabyte earlier. That was a I volunteer to do this math.
All right, so 128 is going to be 8000. No. 00? No.
1K is 0400.
Right. So looking at that times 128, which would be a number I'm not going to be able to pull out.
Somebody said 1 FFFF.
That's what I thought it would be.
Yeah, that makes sense. That sounds right.
Yeah.
1 FFFF. If 4 Fs is
Yeah.
4 Fs is 64, you just
Duh. Yeah.
yeah. We
So
are.
by 2 zeros, you're
He's like, you guys are doing math. Just think
So
about it.
we're gonna. You've probably given half your talk already.
I
I'm
know.
sorry,
I've been
Okay,
trying
go.
to avoid structure.
Well, we're going to impose a little bit of structure here for the next 30 minutes. So, guys, I think, first of all, I'm sorry for the tight space. We got probably 2 times or 3 times as many people as we expected for this event.
Congratulations.
So, and I think mostly due to David mentioning it on the channel. That's great. I think I'm glad everyone's here. Hopefully, you get to see what other hobbyists in the area are doing, and hopefully maybe make it out for another one. We're going to have a bigger venue sometime in the future, so we're working on that.
You're looking good, by the way.
So we got 3 talks lined up. They're all informal. The time
Wonderful
slots
shot of
are
me
really
drinking.
good to see. But David's going to talk about Centurion, the company that time forgot, and also probably a little bit about the computer, if you guys have any interest in computers. I know it can be done. And then we've got Michael Aldridge, who's scheduled, but I don't know if he's here. I haven't seen him or he hasn't touched base with me. He's going to talk about networking, about retro networking. And then we have Alex J. Cox. He's visiting Dallas from the East Coast, and he's going to talk about the East Coast retro computing scene and VC Federation and the upcoming VC Federation Southwest Conference. So it should be really interesting. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be here for any of it, but I'm relying on the
You can leave your
videos.
HP 9100 with me. I'll take care of it.
It's hard, unfortunately, but we'll talk.
We'll steal that.
We'll talk. All right, guys, enjoy. I think this is going to be a really good one. And then also make sure. I think afterwards there should be plenty of time to go and look around, see what else is cooking out here. All right, welcome.
Awesome.
Take it away.
All right. Eventually, this thing is going to boot again. It takes, I literally timed it. It takes 4 minutes. 4 minutes and like 5 seconds to boot. I'm going to preface this story by saying, as some of you may have heard earlier, it happened. It started 14 years before I was born. So the story starts in 1970. I was born in 1984. So obviously, I wasn't there to experience it, but some people were. Notably this gentleman here, and there's a gentleman out there that were there to experience it. But they put me up here to tell the story, so there's going to be things that I get wrong. And also, I've heard the story from about 6, 7 different people that were there. Well, everybody has their own version of the story. So there's going to be things that don't sound flattering for some people and sound very flattering for other people just because that's who I heard it from. I'm also going to get a lot of things, shady things. There was some shady parts that happened that I don't know all the details on. So there's going to be some question marks and black areas in the middle of it. But with that out of the way, I showed the picture of the sketchiest looking gentleman in the world. I mean, it was 1970. These are the 4 people that essentially founded Centurion. This is John Rex Warren and this is Bud Smith. Those are the 2 guys that probably the names are going to come up the most. A lot of times when you get into these stories, you can end up with like 40 or 50 different names and you lose track of them. But just remember John Warren and Bud Smith. Those are the 2 guys we care about the most because John Warren founded the company Centurion. As a matter of fact, the company when it started was called Warex because he thought it sounded cool, but also his name was John Rex Warren. So, a lot of ingenuity went into that. But apparently, I don't see it myself, but apparently he was quite the ladies' man. So I have this hilarious image in my brain of this swanky programmer rolling around in 1970 writing an operating system from scratch. This operating system, as a matter of fact. So we'll do a .sta here. So he wrote this operating system from scratch, but he kind of ran into a problem because he was a software guy, not a hardware guy. I'm a hardware guy, not a software guy. With our powers combined, we make one operational human being. So he was looking for some hardware. So he got in touch with a company called Eldorado Electrodata, and I believe they were out in California. They had something that they were calling the EE200. And it was essentially 3 CPU cards in a passive backplane. And he's like, I can use your hardware and adapt my software to your instruction set, and we can get it going. So I want your hardware. And so that hardware was then licensed to a company called Fetter Automation or Fetter Mainframes or something like that. David Fetter was the guy who did it. Fetter was building the boards for Centurion. And there were 3 boards, and then they built a 4th board for DMA, Direct Memory Access. So they called it the CPU-4 because they had four boards. And they took their CPU-4, which was a pretty decent chunk of hardware, and they took some drive control boards, threw in a Hawk drive. A CDC Hawk drive is a 10 megabyte Hawk drive that weighs 130 pounds. So yeah, but also it was crazy fast. So the very first systems had the CPU-4 CPU in it, had the Hawk drive, and had 4K of core memory. That's the era that we're talking about, right? So this is all just kind of getting you guys familiar with the hardware. And they were selling this hardware, and it was actually killing it because they had the Hawk drive and it was random access, and at this time everybody was on tape, right? So tape is sequential, right? The problem with tape is if I want to go back and do something, I got to get the tape all the way to the end, rewind, come back around, everything's sequential. So now we had a random access operating system that was multi-user, even though we were on a relatively limited 4K. They were leaning heavily on the Hawk drive, and they were selling systems. That sketchy dude was selling systems for $40,000 in the early 70s. I wouldn't buy a $600 used car from that guy, but he was selling big systems. I don't want to talk ill of the dead, which is a bit of a spoiler alert here. He didn't make it. So they were selling systems. They were getting more and more popular, and dude was starting to make some money. And so he did what any fancy dude would do: is he went out and bought a C3 Corvette. Do we have some car guys in here? We all know what a C3 Corvette is, right? C3 Corvette is epic, very cool car. And he was on a service call out in West Texas, and anybody who's driven through West Texas knows that for as far as you can see, the road is straight, and if it's the 1970s, there are no cops. So he did what any owner with a C3 Corvette would do, and he put it into the triple digits. And he was also on Firestone tires. Yeah, that's the face. That's the face. The Firestone tires came apart at well over 100 miles an hour. The car came apart as it tumbled and destroyed itself, and Mr. John Rex Warren died in that car crash. And this was right around, say, 1973, 1974, right when Warrex Computers was starting to take off. Now, John started the company with his brother-in-law, Bud. Bud is not a computer guy at all. He is a businessman through and through, and Bud became the CEO. So now Bud is in charge of Centurion, and well, at that time it's called Warrex. And he wants to kind of get the name away from Warrex because, you know, that was John's thing. So that was when the name changed to Centurion Computers. And the question became, where did Centurion come from? There's 2 answers to that. If you ask Bud himself, which I have done, I actually did get to talk to Bud. He says Centurion is the guardian of the people's data. So we called it Centurion. I'm like, oh, right, that is a wonderful marketing answer. Awesome. And then if you hunt around and read around, there's some rumors floating around that the employees just really dug the buddy cop movie, The New Centurions, which is the story that I like far better. probably totally untrue, but that's the one I'm going with because they put me up here to tell the story, right? So they're building these systems, they're calling them Centurions, and they're starting to upgrade and get into more complex things. So Centurion is getting to a point where they're starting to produce their own cards. They produce their own Hawk control cards, but they're still getting the CPU 4 cards from David Fetter. And well, you can see based on how this looks, this is essentially just a miniaturized version of what the real deal looks like. You can see this is the real deal here that I kind of mocked it after. The top and side panels here, in the real version, they're about twice as wide and twice as thick. They're made out of MDF with rosewood veneer attached to them. And one of the things that Centurion did to save money is they built all of their cabinets themselves. So they had a table saw in their factory off of JL Drive, and they were cutting the tops, cutting the side panels. And because they're in the business of building computers and not in the business of cleaning up sawdust, they caught their factory on fire. And so the fire department showed up and put the fire out, but there was an office inside the factory that had a bunch of sawdust on it as well that was also smoldering that the fire department didn't see. So they put the fire out, they left, and then the fire started again, and it was slower to come back this time, and they nearly burnt down the entire factory. In the process of that, they lost a lot of the artwork for the CPU cards that they were doing, that they were building. So this was a big problem, because the artwork is what they have to send to the vendors that had all of the revisions and corrections that they'd come up with over the past couple of times. So they said, you know what, we have our own engineers, we know how to make cards, we know how to design cards, let's redesign the CPU 1, 2, and 3. So they made new artwork for that, and they said, you know what, David Fetter, you can go say words that I'm not supposed to say. You can get out of here. So they cut him loose. He was furious. So that's one enemy that they've now made. And they start producing their own CPU 1, 2, and 3, and 4 cards. But they're also going, okay, making all of this stuff out of TTL is not necessarily a great idea. Let's start working on a new design. And so then they start in on the CPU 5. And if we go by their previous logic of CPU 4 being 4 cards, the CPU 5 is 5 cards, right? It's 2 cards now, because they gave up on that number of cards equaling CPU thing and just wanted to go with the numbering thing here. So the CPU 5 is just 2 cards sandwiched together. It actually looks very similar to the FFC card right here. It's AM2901 based, which is a 4-bit bit slice ALU. Uses a 56-bit micro word, so it's all micro-coded. And they designed that and built that, and now they're really starting to get put on the map because they've got a CPU out there that is running at 5 megahertz in like 1976, and it's a full random access disk. The Hawk drive is absolutely killing it, but they're also starting to experiment with newer drive types that are coming up. And so they go out to a big trade show out in El Paso. I think that's where it was, I think that's what Bud said. So they go out to this huge trade show. It doesn't matter where it was. They go to this trade show, they show off their computer, and they just absolutely kill it. Everybody's going, man, this thing is rocking. It's fast. At this time, they're up to like 64K memory. They're just way above everybody else. They come back, and Bud Smith gets a call from somebody at the show, and they say, "Hey, you need to meet my client." And he's like, "Who's your client?" He's like, "Can't tell you." Well, I'm not going to meet your client then. He's like, no. You need to meet my client tomorrow. And Bud goes, all right, I'll go meet your client. And so he goes to meet his client, and his client just so happens to be Ross Perot of EDS. So I think everybody knows who Ross Perot is. Ross Perot started a company called EDS. If you haven't read the book On Wings of Eagles, give that book a read. So slight detour. Ross Perot EDS was a huge computer company. Ross Perot had some people in Iran where they were setting up computer systems for the Iranian government. The government refused to pay, so he started to pull his people out. And then the government kidnapped like 3 of his guys and threw them in jail. And so Ross Perot went through his ranks of employees and found a bunch of ex-military guys and mounted a rescue mission and got his guys out of Iran. That's the type of guy that Ross Perot was. Also, Ross Perot didn't take shit from anybody. Right, he ran a very, very tight ship. He liked things in a very specific way. So Ross Perot meets with Bud Smith. They talk about, Ross Perot says, "Hey, I want to buy your company. I want to buy Centurion." And so a lot of the next part of the story comes directly from Bud. So some of it's going to be making Bud seem like he was the saint in all of this, but keep in mind who Ross Perot was, so also keep in mind how that went. But Bud says that he was reluctant at first because he wanted to protect the Centurion dealers. So the way that Centurion built and sold systems was actually very similar to an automotive dealership. So you have the manufacturer sends the machines to dealers, the dealers would then sell them to customers and provide support to the customers, right? Now, Centurion, the manufacturer, also did sell computers and also did supply support for them, but the dealers did a lot of the heavy lifting. And so Bud really wanted to protect his dealers. And he said, you cannot leave my dealers high and dry no matter what happens. If you buy us out, my dealers stay Centurion dealers. And so he came to an agreement with Ross Perot, and EDS bought Centurion. Now, at this point in time, we're getting into the real late 70s, early 80s. I think the buyout happened in 1981. All right, so now Centurion is a wholly owned subsidiary of EDS. They're getting big. This is a company that started with just like 4 people that were either brothers or brothers-in-laws, just pretty much family. And now, at their height, they're getting close to 300 employees. They're huge, right? EDS has them doing all sorts of interesting, weird things. They're still building the CPU6 system now, which is just a multi-wire version of the CPU5 with a couple of microcode changes and some revisions. And that's actually what's in here. This is a CPU6. So they're building the CPU6 version of it now. They're up to 256K RAM on the big systems that are in a cabinet. But EDS also has them building desktop systems as well that are going to like credit unions or for internal EDS stuff. Not only that, EDS, in standard big business fashion, got them to start developing an IBM PC compatible system so that they could then go tell IBM, hey, we've got our own thing, we're not going to buy your systems for that much, so IBM would lower the price. So Centurion got kind of screwed in that deal because they were used as a bargaining chip for that bit. But during this time, Ross Perot was trying to figure out where to take Centurion, and Ross Perot has a big deal going on with GM. So Perot says, okay, Centurion, now you are 100% on GM stuff. Screw your dealers, you're out of here. Bud goes, no, not going to fly. Not going to do that. And again, whether that was how the conversation went or whether that was how Bud saw the conversation went is still up in the air. But Bud and Perot had like weekly meetings, and things just got worse and worse and worse. And finally, Bud said, I'm out of here, right? And he left, he quit. And you don't disrespect Perot like that. So that made Perot furious, right? He was just mad as hell. And so Bud quit and started his own company called Zetron. Around about this same time, a gentleman named Jim was a programmer that had been there since the very early days, and he was extremely familiar with the operating system. He quit as well, and when he did, he just so happened to take a disk pack that was full of the operating system source code and all of the application source code, put it in his bag, and walked out with it. He then sold it to Bud for $5,000. So now Bud has an illegal copy of the operating system. He doesn't have any rights to the Centurion IP or software or hardware at this point. But now he's got an illegal copy of the operating system, and he goes, hey, we're going to build a new system. We're going to build a CPU7, and it's going to use a modified version of the operating system, and we're going to just totally overthrow what Centurion is doing, right? So he gets his boffins on taking apart the operating system, just ripping it apart down to its core, because the operating system had some fundamental flaws. Chief of which was that when they first started the operating system, they wanted to have backwards compatibility with tape drive, which meant that they were stuck to 400 bytes per sector. That made things a pain. Even now on this floppy, you have 76 physical tracks, but the operating system sees it as 96 tracks because we have virtual tracks within the operating system, because the floppy can hold a lot more than 400 bytes per sector and 16 sectors per track. So the FFC card here does a lot of translation. But why have your operating system do that? Nobody's using tape anymore. Let's bump it up to 512 bytes per second. So that's what Bud gets his team doing. They rip the operating system apart, they change it over to 512 bytes per sector, they start fixing buffering issues and changing things to lean more on RAM instead of the disk and things like that. All the while, Bud is still trying to buy the rights to Centurion back from EDS. Now, while this is happening, some strange things start happening. Ken Romain, who's out there, is at this time the head of service. And he goes to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and he looks through a door and he sees a machine that looks like a Centurion, but is not a Centurion. The case is different, the colors are not quite right, but it definitely has the card cage going on. He goes, hey, what's that machine? And somebody goes, oh, that? Don't worry about that. And they close the door. He's like, wait a minute, something's not right here. But he files that away and says, okay, we'll deal with that a little later. And then a little later again, a board shows up for repair. And it's very obviously a Centurion board, but it's not a board that they made. It's hand soldered, something doesn't look right on it. So what had happened is somebody, we don't know who, we have a good idea, but we don't know who, Citron, was building counterfeit Centurion systems to pay the bills. Right? They had the operating system that they got from Jim McGee, who stole it, and they had good clout with the with the PCB manufacturers. So they called up the PCB manufacturers and said, hey, we're Centurion, we need a couple of boards. So the manufacturers would send the boards over to Zetron, thinking that it's Centurion, it's Bud Smith, we've dealt with him before. And so they were getting these boards direct from the PCB manufacturers, soldering them up, putting them in similar looking cases, and selling them for $40,000 to $50,000 a pop. And what happened was a customer had bought one from Bud, but it turned out that the manufacturer, real Centurion headquarters, was closer. They took some boards in to get them repaired there. Jig is up. All right, there's now counterfeit machines out there. We don't know how many were actually sold. I've heard estimates from like 10 to 100. Anyways, it was enough to cause a problem. Ross Perot gets word of this, and Ross Perot runs a tight ship, and he doesn't want any of that. So he forces Centurion, the real Centurion, to go to every single customer that got a counterfeit system, take all of their boards out, replace them with genuine real boards to make the customer systems whole. And then all of the counterfeit boards are brought back to Perot, where they're taken behind closed doors and destroyed. All right. So the counterfeit system. So the customers don't get screwed here, right? They get genuine stuff, and they're getting taken care of correctly. But this pretty much just kills Centurion in the process, right? I mean, they essentially had to build between 10 and 100 machines for free. So Centurion is hurting at this point, and Bud he's sick of it. He wants it gone. I don't want to deal with Centurion anymore. He sells it to Bud. Bud somehow manages to talk Perot out of it. He buys all the Centurion IP, starts development on the CPU 7. They get a CPU 7 out of the door in like 6 months, which would have been impossible had he not stolen a bunch of stuff earlier, right? So they've got a CPU 7 out of the door, which again, I think Ross Perot starts to put 2 and 2 together and goes, this mother is stealing from me. He stole from me. So then Perot wages war against Bud Smith. And, well, you don't wage war against Perot. He's got an infinite budget. He's got a budget with so many zeros I can't fathom it, right? And so the best way to wage war against a small business is to just hit him with litigation over and over and over again. Sue him on small stuff. Sue him 100 times. Sue him 150 times. I've got the lawyers. Who cares, right? So Bud spent every waking minute of his life in court until he went bankrupt. And when he went bankrupt, Zetron went bankrupt, and that was the end of the CPU 7 systems. And so Perot won, Centurion was dead. At this point in time, Bud just offloaded it to a dealer. Buddy Cruz was the name of that dealer, and he ran a company called Cruz Computers. Buddy Cruz bought Centurion, and from there, held on to it. So Buddy Cruz, unfortunately, he died he passed away about 4 years ago, I think, and whoever his successor, Mr. Williamson, currently holds the Centurion intellectual property. But while Buddy Cruz had it, they skipped the CPU 8 because the CPU 8 sounded like it was an 8-bit machine, even though it was an 8-bit machine. We're getting into the late 80s. We want to sound like we're competing with the 16-bit minis of like DEC and digital. So they skipped the CPU 8 and they went straight to the CPU 9. At this point in time, they're like deep into multi-bus, and the CPU 9 was essentially a like heavily modified version of CPU 7, which again was still a 2901 base with microcode and stuff like that. They went through and cleaned up a ton of the microcode, bumped the processor speed up, and it was like 40% faster than CPU 7. Then they built the CPU 10, which was like no holds barred, hardcore, proper, hard, badass equipment hardware. But at this point in time, it's like 1992, 1993. writing's on the wall, man. Many computer companies are dead. They're dying, right? The future is 5150. Well, I mean, 5150 is old by this point, but the future is 286s, 386s, right? And so, a gentleman I talked with the other day, Dave Williams, he was with Centurion from about 1978 to 1995 or so. He was digging through the Centurion code one day, and he's looking at the assembly. He's very familiar with assembly, and he looked at x86 assembly, and he went, dang, that's close. So he called up his buddy, and the two of them sat down and looked at it and went, we could port our new stolen version of the operating system to x86 pretty easily. And they said, yeah, man, let's just hammer it out. So the two of them sat down and they hammered it out, and they ported the newest version of the Centurion operating system over to x86 assembly, put it on a 286, and that was the system that they started selling to customers. And one of the things that Buddy Cruz was really good at was figuring out how to modify that system to work with the strange needs of the customers. In particular, there was a furniture manufacturer up in Tennessee, which is where Buddy Cruz was located at, and they needed something like 250 serial devices on one computer. So we're talking 250 peripherals running through a single machine. That's a ridiculous number of peripherals. But Buddy Cruz found a way to get the Centurion operating system to do that. And, well, now the history gets real fuzzy between 95 and today because we don't really know anybody that's willing to talk to us. Now, I have talked to Byron Williamson, the current owner of the Centurion IP, and he says they still have 2 customers that are using a version of this operating system today. My guess is that one of those customers is the furniture manufacturer that needed the crazy requirement of 250 serial devices on it. But because of that, he doesn't want me open sourcing or sharing anything yet, which is incredibly frustrating. But I'm a lot younger than he is, and so I'm gonna play the long game here, and I'm gonna win. So pretty much that's where we're at. So that was a short 30-minute rundown of the Centurion's history. It's a much longer story with a lot more shadier stuff going on, but to confine it to 30 minutes, I think I hit all the major points. He's nodding his head, so that's good. He remembers it. Like I said, it happened. I was 1 year old when the counterfeiting scandal happened. So yeah, so there we go. So there's the hardware is pretty interesting. The hardware is I don't know, what I find most fascinating about it is that it's hardware that nobody's ever really heard of in this company. Yes, sir.
So can you speak a little about the use cases? I know last you mentioned that they kind of customize it for version 60 application, but what were the use cases for these computers? I mean, they weren't learning word processing or what?
No, as a matter of fact, they were terrible at word processing.
Oh, I'm sure.
they had.
But what was the main use cases for?
So CPAs and oil and gas. So oil, I don't know enough about the oil and gas industry to really tell you what's going on, but they have a phenomenal amount of data that they've got to keep track of. And so that, oil and gas was their number 1, and accountants were their number 2. As a matter of fact, the picture that I showed here is an early CPU 4 system. So this open area here at the card cage, that's this area on the bottom. You can see it's got a single hawk drive in it. And apparently the CPAs were complaining that they didn't have enough storage space with a single hawk. Because if you wanted to change disk packs, you had to essentially stop work so we can pull the hawk out, pull the disk pack out, and new disk pack in, and stuff like that.
Well, I'm a software guy, and so I coded in the late 80s, 90s, 10s, and
Yeah.
But back then, I mean, there weren't applications. I mean, they were just really data processing, stuff with COBOL.
So they had
using
applications.
Fortran.
Yeah, they had a general ledger application. They had a
Okay.
CPA application.
Okay.
So one of the things that the dealer network was really good at. So the manufacturers, Centurion as a manufacturer, would build the hardware, and they had a base set of applications to kind of get you started. But the dealers would work very closely with their customers to figure out what their exact needs were, and then they would write a specific application for that customer and provide support.
Like COBOL, Fortran.
CPL.
Oh, CPL.
Centurion Programming Language. We can actually view one here. Back to.
Is that like a step up from assembler, or?
So CPL is Centurion's own programming language. It's similar to COBOL, but it actually does assemble down directly to assembly. It is very.
And you don't need, like you said, you don't need to compile it because it's built in, right? So
Yeah. So, well, it has a compiler on here that you compile into an executable. I don't know if I left the ASCII file on there.
because when I started doing some COBOL, but then of course got into modern things. So I never really experienced the old way of.
Yeah. So this is like CPL is very similar to COBOL. COBOL. I don't know how you pronounce it. It's very human language based. So like instead of like saying 5 less than sign 3 or whatever, right? Or yeah, here we go. So like this is the program that I wrote. It doesn't have any math in it. It's just like printing to the screen and stuff like that. So you like if you want to say like if my variable is less than or equal to 3, you type variable name var.le.3. So it's all very language based, human English based, right? Like,
Yeah, it has
like
good grammatical rules.
Yeah,
It's like a sentence.
Yeah, that's the idea. Is that you kind of try to program it like a sentence. Yeah.
What's the state of the emulator if you want to play with this?
What's the what?
State of the emulator if you want to play around with this system?
So the emulators online, like.
I haven't kept up on.
Yeah, so we have a link to it. The emulator's really good. It emulates the microcode of the CPU6. The speed of the CPU6 on the emulator is about half. So it's like running one of these at 2.5 megahertz. But the simulated Hawk drive is like triple the speed of a real Hawk drive. So the overall experience comes out to about the same. It kind of evens out. And it's really good. As a matter of fact, whenever I want to do anything on the real machine, I do it on the emulator first. I sit down on the emulator and figure out how to do it because spinning the Hawk drive up is a risk every time you do it anyways. Just I don't know, I have faith in the Hawk drive. Like that thing is bulletproof almost. But I mean, it is a wear item and eventually it's going to wear out. So I always double check it so that my Hawk drive uptime is minimal. But, I mean, I had the Hawk drive spun up for like 6 hours the other day and it was fine. See what's up?
In some of the program listings or directory listings in the videos, I see the word basic. And
Yes.
I want to think that's a basic interpreter. Is it?
Yep. Yeah, so it's a I don't know, I'm probably not going to get the terminology right here. It doesn't, it compiles into an executable, but it's an interpreted executable, so it runs through a basic interpreter. But it does compile from basic down to something intermediate in there.
So it's sort of like when
Yeah, he could probably answer this. He's the programmer.
It's a pseudocode. It compiles into a pseudocode. It's kind of like Pascal, like the old P system.
But it's, I mean, line numbered, old style, basic.
It's
right.
Yeah, pure ANSI. So it forces line numbers, forces the let statement. It's horrible.
So were there any other interpreters or anything like that besides CPL, which you could write code on this thing?
CPL and Basic are the only ones I know of. Somebody made
Assembly.
an assembly, but somebody made a C compiler. So around the x86 era, they did a C cross compiler. But at that point in time, it's totally incompatible with this because they're up to 5 kilobyte sectors. And it's,
So did anybody besides, I'm sorry, last question. Did anybody besides the dealers or Centurion themselves write software? Were there third-party software packages for it? Since there were other, ways to write code for it.
I don't have a good answer to that. I mean, I'm sure there's nothing stopping a customer from writing their own code.
The gas software, I think, was an independent group. Like, I don't know if they were dealers or if it was just a software.
Okay. Yeah, so he said the oil and gas software might have been totally independent, whether it was by dealers or somebody else unrelated.
So why CPL instead of COBOL? Why a custom? Any idea?
It was the 70s. We want to make our mark. We want to be our own thing.
Well, it could be. I could see it as a competitive advantage and a disadvantage. It's a lock-in, but then you can't easily port.
Yeah. So all I can really say is like. All I can really talk about is what we've learned about by learning CPL and reading the manual. So there's a very kind gentleman that's over on the East Coast, I think, Jeff Tomek. He used to be a dealer programmer for Centurion, and when he quit, he took a CPU6 programmer's manual with him, and he was kind enough to mail that to me. So we have the full programmer's manual that goes through all of the code, and even in the manual, they say like CPL is a programming language that's similar to COBOL or Fortran. Like they even say that in the manual. But I think the big thing is like the CPL software is very much so geared towards like accounting software. So it doesn't do floating points at all. It's purely integer based. And so like if you're doing money, you just do everything in pennies, right? I spent 10,000 pennies today, and then you just move your decimal point later. So when you print the actual value to the screen, it does show a decimal point for cents, but as far as the math is concerned, the decimal point doesn't exist, right? So like it's totally integer based. One of the good things about CPL though is that you can in the middle of a program you can break out into it and type in direct assembly. So you're going through and like you don't have the CPL function to do this thing that you want to do, so you drop into assembly for just that function, and then you drop back into CPL after that. So CPL makes it easy to program the majority of the stuff, but then you have the flexibility to go into assembly, which is the assembly is a nightmare. So like the original CPU4, it uses an 8-bit opcode, right? So that gets you 256 octave, right? So you had the original CPU4 only used about 190 to 200 opcodes. So the remaining 50 were just illegal operations. So when they went to CPU5, they found out all the shortcomings of the assembly, and so they started adding in functions. And so they filled all that up, and they went, we want to add 100, but we've only got 50 spaces here. So they said, okay, on this one, when you hit this opcode, you've got another byte after it that tells us what kind of mode we're going to go into. So I think it's like 2E or something like that. You hit 2E, and then your next byte tells you whether you're doing big number multiplication, big number addition, big number subtraction, division. So like you've got much more in-depth opcodes from there. So it's like, yeah. So in the end, you go, okay, I need to memorize 340 opcodes. That's not going to happen, right? But a lot of them are implicit. So because memory size was so tight, like you do load A with this address, right? So if you type that out directly, it would be like a 3-byte opcode or 4-byte opcode. But they do it as implicit. So you just hit this opcode, and that just loads A with that address no matter what every time. So that way you could get your compiled programs down as small as possible. So pretty much all of the load and store operations have an implicit version.
I'll think of one more question.
Okay. I mean, you can keep asking questions after he turns that off, but I'm not going anywhere.
We just have another speaker, a few more speakers together.
Well, you can kick us out of the room.
Okay.
Does the operating system programming language support the use of something, let's say like a library? Maybe not a shared library, but link it with these things to add routines that can be reused?
Yeah, there's an applications library that has a linker.
Okay.
And you can create libraries. Yeah, it does that already.
So if I wanted to design something, let's say like a term cap library, so that I could write a simple Pong game for that, the library can be either borrowed from somebody or reused.
You can create a library and then link it against your another program. Yeah.
Okay.
I couldn't have answered that. I'm glad he's here. Like I said, I'm a hardware guy, not a software guy. Like I can talk all day about the weird, strange chips that are on there. But
So the Centurion was always a what a mini computer is a marker. Never was a microcomputer until the operating system was ported.
yeah. So it was always a mini computer. It was always the original ones were TTL, and then it went 2901. I think it was 2901 based. It was 2901 based all the way through CPU.
So 2901 is.
It's a 4-bit.
3.
Oh, the 7 was 2903.
2903, yeah.
That's right. So it's a 4-bit bit slice ALU.
The bit slice, two of them together.
Yeah, so you put two of them. So it's 4 bits. So you put two of them together and get your 8 bits. So it's an 8-bit data bus and a 16-bit memory address bus that they then expanded with 3 additional
It's
bits
still
for,
kind of
for
a
big memory.
multi-chip CPU.
Yeah. So it's a full board. Like this whole board right here is the CPU, which we can pop out as long as we're patient enough to wait for 4 minutes for it to bring out. Yeah, we'll go ahead and pull the CPU out right quick. So this is what they call a multi-wire board. You can see it's pretty strange looking, but that's the CPU board. So those are the two 2901s, which are not that hot. I was a little worried I didn't get cooling fans going on. So then you've got the sequencers over here, and this CPU uses a 56-bit micrometer. The FFC card and pretty much all of the later drive cards, they all went to a 2901 based setup. Pretty much, like as soon as the engineers were like, we know how to work with the 2901, they did everything with the 2901. Like if we could make it run on a 2901, they did it because they knew how to do it. So the FFC actually uses a 64-bit microword, but the CPU for some reason is only I don't know if on CPU 7 or 8 they went to on CPU 7 they went to like 108-bit microword. It was like some huge weird number. So it was like half of the board was ROMs, right? Just to try and get enough memory, read-only memory for the microwords. But this is a multi-wire card. So they have, I think, we can't tell unless we scrape it away, but I think there's a power and ground plane on the fiberglass board in the center, and then they lay out the traces with enameled wire, and then they put epoxy over it, and then they lay out another trace with enameled wire, and they put epoxy over that, and then they do that on both sides. And then they found out that they had a design error, and so every single CPU6 has a little baud wire on the back here. That's not a repair; they all came out of the factory with that. Oops. That's the classic. We ordered 100 of these, and all 100 of them don't work. Great. So before the CPU6 here, they had they went with like a 2-card sandwich. They used double-sided cards, and they sandwiched them together. So this is the FFC card. Now we had to modify the microcode to work with our floppy drive here because it was too slow. That floppy drive wants 10 millisecond pulses coming into it to seek the heads. The FFC card here was written for 3 millisecond pulses, so it was written for a CDC 9406. This is a 9400. So we had to modify H4. It was a 1-byte change, but it required making an adapter board, and so I got this wart hanging off of it. But there's that's the microcode. There's the 2901s, the sequencers. So this is essentially like a standard CPU board that they use. And so if they wanted to interface with something like, say, a floppy drive and a Finch drive, they would just bolt on the back here the drive interface board. So this one does 1 floppy and 3 Finch drives, or very early CDC RIN drives. They had the same interface, but they also had one that did 4 floppy drives, and they had one that did 1 floppy and 3 CDC tape streamer drives. And on all of those, this board was the same. They had this thing sitting on the shelf. Said that was our CPU. They just changed the microcode for whatever drive they were using, and went from there. Now the CPU5 was built with an almost identical construction, although instead of 8, they would have had 7 to keep the 56-bit microword versus 64-bit microword. But it was the same idea. 2901s on just kind of like your standard run-of-the-mill basic board here, and then you flesh out your functionality on the other side there. So that's the FFC card. And then the rest of these are kind of boring. There's a DRAM card in here. That's a lot of 4116s. Only those failed.
That's the one you repaired?
That's the one I repaired. It worked. I didn't think it was one of those things I was telling them earlier. It was one of those things where it didn't work. So I went in to go edit the video, and I get my rough edit together, and I'm like, okay, I need to go back and I need to film B-roll, like close-up shots of the memory card not working. So I plug it in, and it works. I'm like, well, now I don't get any B-roll, but at least it works. So I was a little nervous about bringing this one here because it didn't work at first. But I was like, well, it's been working for a week, so it should work for another 4 hours at least. So that's a 128K DRAM board. The dip switch settings on here, you can set the base address, like where this sits in the memory address space. So you can put 2 of these in there side by side, and just with a dip switch setting, you set which one sits where. The only other board of import to get the machine booted is the multiplexer card. It has 4 UARTs on it. It's programmable. Like once you're in the operating system, you can run just a statement of the JCL code to change the baud rate, the bits, whether it's 7 bits or 8 bits, even parity, odd parity, no parity, 1 bit, 1 stop bit, 2 stop bit. You can program all of that for each one. The fourth UART here is usually reserved for like serial printers and stuff like that.
So does that mean you can hang any serial terminal you want off of that?
Yeah.
So be it the EIA serial?
Yeah. I mean, if somebody has a serial terminal here, you can plug it in and use it on this machine if you want.
To write that program into it.
Yeah, you had the TI hanging on for that.
Yeah. I had the TI plugged into this. I brought my laptop with one of those USB to RS-232. The pinout on here is a little funky, so you gotta get the pinout
So
right.
you've got CPM on your Wang Rider. You could interface them, right?
Except the Wang Rider doesn't have a serial board.
Oh, well, challenge. There you go.
Yeah. We talked about that.
Because I want to see you print on the Wang Rider from the Centurion.
Yeah. So do I.
Yeah.
I want to see that as well.
Okay, that's going to happen then? I can look forward to that?
Huh?
So your terminal was plugged in to that.
Yeah. So this is that's
that's
the terminal right there.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and then this is the board that Ken hooked me up with, the diag board that got the whole thing going. That keeps the door open because we took the code off of these 4 ROMs here. These are not the original ROMs. I ripped them off and replaced them, and this one's been replaced so much I don't even put tape over it anymore. So we dumped the code off of these ROMs, and that was our very first look at any kind of Centurion code. And from there, we started reverse engineering the assembly, started figuring out what was going on, figuring out the basics, and then working our way up from there. So that's the genesis. That's what got us to where we are today. And then Ken came down and helped me get a hawk drive running. And we just lucked out that one of the disk packs had a OS backup on it. Like we could have just blind luck. I only got 3 disk packs with the initial buy, and then I got an extra 2 disk packs from DJ on the counterfeit system. And one of them is bad, can't be read by anything. 2 of them just had random data on it. One had the operating system, and I haven't been able to read the 5th one yet because the head alignment is not correct for it. So the problem with the disk pack is that over the years, if the head shifts slightly, when you write data to that disk pack again, now you're on that slightly shifted position. And so that happened. We had those disk packs come from 2 different machines in 2 different places that had been used all the way up until 1995. So at some point in time, they just stopped doing head alignments on it. And every time you turn the hawk drive off, the voice coil slams the heads back. And there's supposed to be these little rubber bumpers in there that cushion it. But I mean, at that point in time, those rubber bumpers are 20 years old, so they had started to disintegrate. So the heads had shifted, and so each disk pack has a slightly different positioning of the heads, which means we need to get a hawk drive set up where it's open and I can adjust the heads to match the disk and then get the data off the disk. Do you need the room?
Probably. Do we have Michael Aldridge around here for the PSTN networking?
Okay, I'm here.
Michael Aldridge.
Hey! You! I have your boards in here. These are your boards.
Oh my gosh.
They're on the table, man. Well, all of them except for one.
Sorry, the memory board didn't work.
It does work.
Oh, you got it fixed?
Yeah, well, I didn't get it fixed. I just plugged it back in. It's right here, man. This was his. I bought it from him.
Yep. You can't see him on camera.
This is all original Centurion stuff.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a shout outside for Michael. Unfortunately, this is kind of our lecture hall for the moment, so if I can't find Michael, we'll just give a brief floor to Alex, and then you can have the room back.
That's cool. I'll just put it back together.
Cool.
That might be a slow but steady source of your systems if you need it.
Oh, the 4164s modified seem to work really well. Okay, cool. Yeah, I don't know why I have a bunch of those, but I have a bunch of them. It's one of those things where like you look through your parts bin, you're like, I don't have any 4116s. Why do I have so many 4164s? Why did I buy these? Whatever, I'll use them. Sure. Yeah. If you have multiples. Okay, so I always use this is actually multi-user. You don't need them. Absolutely.
No virtual memory, but there's a lot of
that number is a hard number to hammer down. I've heard anywhere between 2,000 and 10,000, which is a bit. It's not too much. Yeah, it's not a huge amount, but it also that's a lot of difference between those two numbers.
Where in Texas was
Here, Dallas. On JL Drive, probably only about 20 minutes from here.
Is that like a rebranded BT100 or?
It's an ads Regent. This is a Regent 25. They use ads Regent 100 is the other terminal. So ads was just a data terminal manufacturer that was competing with DEC and everybody else at that time as well.
Okay, so I was saying, if I'm writing out what you're saying, so that means
ask how you
I get as much as I can get my hands on it. I need it.
The hot drives, they were used in everything of that era. Because they were killer. Like the Wayne used them. Like I can take like Wayne disc packs and they pretty much drop in. Wow.
Yeah, I have a disc pack. It looks like it's about the same as what I've seen in videos. It was made as what was branded as a Data General 1604. I think.
Okay.
So I don't know if that was rebranding.
It could very well be.
Like the caddy is almost exactly the same.
So all these chips are. This is the famous test board.
Yeah, that's the diag board.
Diag board.
Yeah, that's the one that saved us.
Yeah, I'm watching your YouTube channel for a long time, and I was kind of interested in seeing this thing here.
Oh, all right, awesome. So Yamauchi-san.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
はじめまして.
So if I'm using, my address space is separate from his address space.
Well, it's basically 74, chip 7400 chips. So basically it's off the shelf,
Whatever they could get from whatever manufacturer they could get for as cheap as possible.
Well, I realize that's
The goal was don't spend any money you don't have to.
But the good part is it goes basically off the shelf. No power, no ASIC, no nothing. So that you can swap the things left and right.
No solid or
Yeah, the TI is originally manufactured of 7400 series. Basically, they invented those series and they standardized all the logics. And then all the other manufacturers, Motorola, Fujitsu, everywhere. Everybody.
Somebody made a 7400 series.
I just find it interesting that they're in El Salvador.
Oh yeah. TI has them in Korea. Every once in a while I come across a Korea.
TI has Japan, TI Korea, Singapore, Malaysia, everywhere.
That's pretty close to
I'm so sorry.
I mean, yeah.
Like engine manufacturing Chinese factories.
You can limit strong memories.
I don't know how
But if you're the only
So what's the size of the bus?
8 bits.
No, I mean like how many connections?
Oh,
so that means that this machine would actually have
72 pins front and back.
So it's totally, it's not like it's totally proprietary.
Totally proprietary. It's like on the back, it's like data, and then most of the address bus with powering around on the outside. Plus, you also have they have plus 5 volts, plus 12 volts, minus 12 volts. So all of those, that's available on the bus for every board. So you get mostly data, mostly address, and then on the front side you have like address preempt and data ready and stuff like that from memory. And then you've got like interrupt levels and interrupt requests. And then you have a couple more bits for the expanded memory address.
So I've designed things like this, but just in software. And I'm very interested in hardware stuff.
Okay.
So on their CPU cards that have multiple cards, they're not coordinating with the backplane, they're coordinating with data cables.
Yeah.
Because you have to, when you pull your word off, you have to orchestrate the work of other chips based on those.
Yeah.
So did they do those with cables, or was it through the backplane?
Everything except for DMA was through the backplane.
Okay.
To an extent. I mean, obviously, like the.
But your CPU is on a single card here.
Yeah. So like even the CPUs that were on multiple cards, like the CPU 4, they didn't have a cable. It was just all through the backplane.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like they're pretty custom. Don't follow any standards. You need to look like with the hard drive, honestly.
So the first standard that they followed was tape systems, which was 400 bytes per second. So that's where they got their limitation of 400 bytes per second. But the Hawk drive is 16 sectors per track, hard sector. But you can fill those sectors however you want, with however many bytes you want. So they just kind of waste a little bit of real estate there, sticking with their 400 bytes per second.
It's pretty custom.
Yeah. So when they got to the floppy here, these are soft sectors. And you can fit a lot more data in one sector. So they actually stuffed 1.2 soft. They actually stuffed 1.2 virtual sectors in or virtual tracks in a physical track. So
There's gonna be an X. But I don't know what he's
Yeah. Frustrating, right?
So if you start building these, you got a first set of production. You see how it works? Probably you sit down one.
No, I'm not sitting just yet. Fumble this a little bit.
You need to sit down. Sorry, I'm following you.
Well, thank you so much for your channel.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for watching.
And are you like several people like help with your projects?
So I have a Discord where pretty much everybody chimes in.
Okay, yeah, just hit that.
There's a guy.
Because I'm like software. I mean, I'm learning hardware and I know a lot, but that's my weakness, hardware.
Yeah, if you jump on the Discord, like that's where I'm most active. I spend all my time on the Discord. We have just working on the Centurion project. There's lots of rails to be there. People in Germany. There's people in New Zealand. There's a guy in New Zealand that SJ Software at Gecko. I mean, he pretty much helped me diagnose the floppy. He figured out a time, and I would set up the camera, and he would log in, and we would talk live while I was going through and checking stuff, and we would diagnose the floppy. He's the one that figured out which bit we needed to change on the microcode for the FFC card to get it to work. So
it is kind of like being local.
Yeah.
Maybe you can offer things that somebody remote couldn't. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, like I'm only marginally local. I'm like 2 hours from here.
Oh wow.
Okay. So anybody that wants to like drive 2 hours to look at a computer and go, yeah, man, that's broken. I'm sorry.
Local for certain definitions of local.
Yeah. I mean, that's like. I
didn't know how local you were.
The 2 hours is short for me, but I realize that's long for a lot.
In a Texas standard, 2 hours is short.
Yeah.
I drove from Austin.
Yeah. So I mean, he's got a lot of. I mean, I think a lot of people drove from Austin.
It's a draw. You're a draw. I think you're the reason half the people are here.
I hope I lived up to the hype.
I think it's pretty cool.
The story was like very the history of it.
So I have two. Yeah, and actually, the bits in this one came out of the second one. So the counterfeit system. We think it's a counterfeit. Like again, we don't have any proof. That's crazy. We have no real proof because all the real counterfeit cards are destroyed. And when I look behind, like in some of the cards that they shouldn't even change, like the back plane or like the front panel, which is in here, you look at it, it's like a proper, genuine, real Centurion wave soldered thing. So either the counterfeit was extremely well done, or it wasn't a counterfeit. It was just a system that got sold in that weird era where Zetron actually owned the intellectual property, but they were just trying to make ends meet, and so they bought the cheapest cabinet they could find, and they just threw some stuff in it and sold it to a customer. So it could be a genuine system, or it could be a counterfeit system. We don't really know. So
it's like IBM Hitachi, IBM Fujitsu, big Hitachi, and started with the IBM, fake IBM.
So the counterfeit system is hard for me because I think it's kind of cool, like the history behind it and the story that like I can't prove anything. It's so ugly.
Yeah, there's just enough stuff about it.
Having it is just unattractive. And so like I'm like, yeah, I'll restore the counterfeit system. And then I turn the camera off and I look at it and I'm like, I hate you. So I think the next thing I'm going to do is I'm not going to restore the counterfeit system.
Yeah.
I'm going to put it in a bag and I'm going to put it up in storage so that the internet doesn't send a lynch mob after me to burn me at the stake. And I'm going to VCF East, I think, the one up in Jersey.
Yeah.
So I'm going to that. So I think the next goal is the original CPU4 system that they built had they only had a single Hawk in them. So they were short. The system pretty much stopped after the first Hawk drive. So compared to this, the top of the system's about there, which still fits in the SUV that I've got. Wow. So I'm like, this thing is still heavy. I'm going to throw my back out lifting it around. If I'm going to throw my back out, let's throw it out for something worth throwing it out for. Right? Let's build something with like a proper Hawk drive in it. So that when it spins up and it seeks the heads, the table shakes, and it sounds like a jet engine is in the room.
It's scary to remove the whole drive because it itself is very, very fragile.
Well, it's fragile and it's 130 pounds.
Oh yeah.
So it's not lightweight. So what would happen is I would have to we would have to take the Hawk drive out and set it in the SUV by itself, and then we would put the cabinet behind it. And then when you get to BCF, you'd be like, hey, I need 10 people.
Yes.
They'll be like, yeah, I'll carry your super fragile Hawk drive for you. Sweet.
Well, gentlemen, if you don't mind, David, thanks so
Yeah, you
much
guys gotta kick me out. That's
for presenting. Michael needs to present, and this is basically the closest room we have to a lecture hall right now. So, Michael, are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. We're going to talk about some PSTN networking.
Yes, so this is going to be a very, very short version.
I'm so sorry, brother.
Oh, no worries. Your stuff is more interesting, man.
No.
Yeah. This is going to be a very,
And
very
you got a whiteboard over there, too, at the chair if you want.
Yeah. Does it have a whiteboard?
Here's a mark.
Locate the whiteboard. This is going to be a very short talk, kind of a teaser. We'll do a longer version at some point in the future. But this is talking about how dial-up in the world of public switch telephony networks work.
Can I do it justice?
IP networks are really cool. In an IP network,
It is going to be
you tend to have a client machine, and then you have one or more nodes in a dense mesh, and then that gets you to a server. And you have packetized data. The packetized data moves through this mesh. This has the classic hot potato routing as envisioned in the original ARPANET white paper and NSF white papers. But if we cross off a machine, we can still route traffic through it. This is not how the telephone network works. The telephone network is far more interesting. You have a phone. This connects to a central office, which connects to a long-distance tandem, which connects to one or more long-distance switching centers, which connects back to another access to another CO at the other end, which connects to the person you actually wanted to call. You'll note there is no redundancy here. If any one of these COs or long-distance switching centers encounters a problem, the network actually has to have control actions taken to reconverge it and to move the traffic around. One of the sites that is responsible for doing this is in Bedford, New Jersey. This is AT&T's main network operations center. If you're not a fan of nice new LCD screens, you want tweed, you want brown and simulated wood effect, well then you want to go to Ackerd Street in Dallas, where one of the original long-distance switching centers is still operational, and that's what these long-distance tandems are. These are telephone switches, large building-sized machines that don't have any subscribers. Their only things connected to them are other telephone companies. Conventionally, this would have only been the Bell system, and that's in fact been after divestiture. What AT&T hung on to was the long lines division, because copper was so unbelievably expensive, and that was the only media they had available, that they figured they could still be a successful, practical company just charging for this long-distance workflow. Because the way the billing works in all this is your billing relationship is here, and the person you're calling has a billing relationship here. But both of you pay fees for this for the same call. So AT&T hung on to what they believed to be the far more lucrative part of the operation, as well as Bell Labs, where they could continue selling things. And then this is how we eventually get to the long-distance network and the AT&T toll system. Now, if we want to build a computer network on top of this, which starts to become the interesting thing, and this is the future that AT&T thought was going to happen, just not quite how it did. AT&T had this concept of you would have a telephone terminal that could both function as a telephone, and it would have a screen on it that would allow you to connect to a mainframe running in the central office, and any services you wanted would be served by that mainframe, or you would connect to a mainframe at a different company. Incidentally, the process by which all of these connections are set up is called the DAP, the Directory Access Protocol. There is no real implementation of the DAP that I'm aware of, only the LDAP ever got implemented, the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. If you read the original RFCs for the DAP, it is talked about as a galactic phone book, because it does have support for interplanetary lookup, where it will try to find you a server in your local group. And it does this by looking at OID path distance and address subgrouping. It's ridiculous and was never really actually needed for any of this. But let's say you do want a computer network and you want it the way it actually happened. Well, in that case, what you have here is a modem, a modulator-demodulator device. Historically, prior to a Supreme Court decision that said yes, you can actually plug into the telephone line, this would have been an acoustically coupled device. And you couldn't really talk too loud near it. You'd throw it off, it couldn't go very fast. Now we have digital modems that connect directly to the telephone line, and this would go to a modem bank at the other end, and the modem bank would be the complete set of dozens or hundreds of access modems, all sitting behind a single telephone number. So you don't need to know the number of the individual modem, you just need to know the number that's going to get you to the bank. Behind the modem bank, you would have some kind of terminal access or remote services server, and then behind that, you'd have your IP network or your X25, your frame relay, all of your conventional data services. So this is the real fast version of what's inside the telephone network. This is kind of how everything is put together. This is actually the workflow that's America Online. This is how their whole system was built. If you want to see a small version of this, it's set up in the exhibit space. Yeah, thank you. I'll take any questions if you got any.
20 years later, I've got it.
So when you talk about the tandems, how messy did all of that get?
Say again?
So how do they keep track of all those tandems?
Well, so AT&T has a mainframe. In fact, they have two that are doing just that, keeping track of all the tandems.
Okay. So I know that the telephone network is kind of evolution, going through the evolution, right? Like it's originally all the old ladies are connecting the jack onto the things to the digital switch, to the analog switch, and then become a digital switch.
Yes.
So how that those things are going to fit into this picture?
Yeah. So what you're referring to is usually called a cord board.
Yeah.
And a cord board sits at the CON. Sometimes they're referred to as ring-down manual switching centers. And your fun fact is the latest active one. Double check the date, but I believe it's 2008 in upstate Maine. There was a very small town where if you wanted to dial someone in this town, you would get the intercept operator at the cord board, and then they would ask you, who are you trying to reach? It's a fascinating experience to call into some place that has a cord board.
And then now it's evolution, evolution to the analog, switching, right?
Yes.
It's like gigantic relay switch.
Yes, step by step or crossbar. Yeah.
Based on that, this number.
Yes. So how the cord board fits into this, though, is that the trunks, center to center, have different signaling on them for the trunk in between you and the office. So from the cord board, if it's really old, they're going to have to actually call a long-distance operator and tell them, I am going to put a call onto this trunk group, onto this circuit number. Please insert this SS7 route. And then the call gets set up like from the middle to one end, and then from the middle back to the cord board, and then they'll set it up from the cord board to the subscriber. As time goes on, those get removed. The cutover process for those is fascinating. There's actually a video on YouTube of the Western Electric Speedy Cutover Service.
I've seen that one.
Yeah, so the way you do this...
Like 25 guys, right?
100.
100?
Yeah. Is some of the guys who were in that video live in Dallas.
Oh, interesting.
You wire the switches electrically in parallel, and then at a prescribed moment, you use what looks like a giant hedge trimmer, and you cut physically the cable that's going to the old switch. There's an amazing moment in this video, because of course you do not do this when there's emergency traffic in progress. So the operator picks up a line, calls down to the 911 call center and says, "Do you have any emergency traffic in progress?" Says, "Good enough," and picks up the radio and says, "Cut it."
And then it's like this video.
I would love to meet the guy and ask, what did he get back that he said good enough?
Right.
About once a month,
one of the comments on that video is like, "Oh yeah, we got 4 murders or something."
Yeah, it's like, is good enough. There's only one small fire going on.
Yeah.
Well, you know, the actual, we just put this one together to make it short.
Okay, think about how both of these drugs are connected, especially for the old days in the earlier digital days.
Yes. Yes.
In the reliability of both networks.
And there are still places that even with fully digital switches require operator-assisted dialing. The two that I'm aware of, one you can call, one you cannot. Numbers inside North Korea require operator-assisted dialing. You can dial those trunks from a regular toll line, but it will put you on a list. The other one is the Vatican. If you dial Vatican inward, you'll get an operator who asks you to be connected.
In Latin, of course.
I've only had that happen once, and I was calling from a line at an
So yeah, it's just been this whole thing of like this whole constant reverse engineering, comparing.
Cool.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Well, you got Michael.
There's a real fast version of this. I'm more than happy to put together a longer version for the future.
Sweet deal. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.
So we got one more talk in here real fast. We're going to have Alexander. He's going to come in and do an announcement about VCF Southwest, I believe. So let me go get him out from out here, and then we'll get started.
And as I said, if you want to see how this actually works, it's all physically set up over there. It's digital from your device. Something hits a CO. And then usually when it hits a CO, it goes back into this kind of workflow.
It really says something.
Oh, this is this
just your volunteering?
This is volunteering, essentially. This is from last year's show, I'm pretty sure. No, it's from 2017.
Where is that located?
Frisco.
Back when in those days, you weren't
Not
actually.
really, I was just curious. I mean, it's cool, but I've never gotten into it, per se.
Gotcha.
I
Alrighty.
actually have one more question. Has anybody made a real version of the Windows XP 3D pinball?
Not yet.
Do you think someone will eventually will?
I was hoping to eventually. All right, let's see what we got.
Well, it was made by that was like a demo for a game.
I'm gonna go.
Yeah, tell me what
Okay, you want to go shout out to people? There's VCF Southwest
made the
announcements.
Sims.
So the third talk is about to start. We're going to talk about VCF, VC Forum, VC Federation, all the events.
Cool.
We already saw everything.
I can be loud.
Good. Okay. Well, as you're ready.
Okay, so for anyone watching out there, or anyone locally here in Dallas, first of all, thanks for inviting me to come down and speak. My name is Alexander Jaycox. I'm one of the organizers for Vintage Computer Festival East, and I'm part of the committee who runs the museum in Wall Township, New Jersey. I'm also a member and supporter of the Vintage Computer Federation Large, which covers over a lot of the vintage computer events in North America and the rest of the world. So we have events mostly at Vintage Computer Festival East and Vintage Computer Festival Midwest works with us. There's also the Vintage Computer Festival Southeast and Vintage Computer Festival West. And we also work with the folks who run the Vintage Computer Festival Europa, which moves around, and the folks who run VCF in Italy, which happened this year. Wow. Yeah, so there are a lot of groups that all work together to bring these festivals off. What we do is we basically, the main thing we trade is information. So the Vintage Computer Federation is a 501c3 nonprofit that seeks to spread knowledge and interest in vintage computing. We spend a lot of our time in education and in working with people to understand and help them to understand modern computing through the lens of vintage equipment. As I mentioned previously, we have a museum in Lowell Township at a former U.S. Army base. It used to be known as Camp Evans. It was a U.S. Army computing and radar research facility. It was handed over at some point to the township in the early 90s, and there are a lot of museums there, ours being one of them. We have an exhibit that contains anything from microcomputers to sometimes historic gaming machines, but primarily microcomputers, mini computers, and full-scale mainframes and supercomputers as well. So we have functional UNIVAC in our exhibit. We have PDP-8 in our exhibit. We have analog machines from MIT. We have machines functional from the 1950s. So we have an amazing collection. So please do come out and see us. The museum is open Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays of every week. And then, as I mentioned previously, there are festivals. So we have the Vintage Computer Festival East. It's usually in April, usually late April every year. I don't have the date right off the top of my head, but that is coming up for this year.
What city is going to be hosted?
Wall Township, New Jersey.
Okay.
At the InfoWeek Science Center.
I did not want to assume.
Yep,
Thank
yep,
you.
absolutely. So there are a day other shows you should check out as well. Vintage Computer Festival Midwest is, I believe this year it's in August. It's usually in August or September, but that is in Chicago, closer to those folks here in Chicago. And there's more things coming up. I don't know, we don't have a date for VCF West. They're working on that venue, but I'm sure it will happen. VCF Italia happened already I think it was in January this year. There will be more events coming up. But one of the things that I work on a lot is I'm the lead admin for vcfed.org, which is the online message board. If you're interested in vintage computing in general, it's a non-specialized message board. We have topics for anything that people like, be it gaming or DOS machines or any of the other subjects a lot of folks don't like to talk about. We'll talk about any of it. We really try to be non-exclusionary. We want everyone to come who has an interest in vintage computing. One of the interesting things that's happened recently, and for those new ones, folks who are not at the Dallas Retrocomputer meetup, they may have heard of the NABU machines. So there are a couple of them on display in the other room, which you won't see here looking at me, but that is a machine that was created in Canada. It is a broadband-based machine, one of the first ones to do it. It's a bit of an internet terminal, which is a term that came out in the early 2000s, but it's a very early one, and a really neat one. But one of the most interesting things about it is because there's so many of the machines available, and they've been available inexpensively to the community, very quickly a community has sprung up around them, including two folks who worked on the original machines. One who was a developer for NABU, and another one who is the son of the founders of the presidents of the company.
I think they had pallets of like 1,000 of them.
Yes, they have many, and still there are many. They're still being sold on eBay. And, yeah, for anyone who's interested, they're out there. They're really nice hardware. They're not very different than a ColecoVision or an MSX1 in hardware.
Yeah.
And they're really well made. They're neat machines. But check out the YouTube channel for DJ Shores and Leo Blinkowski. They are both original folks involved. Leo was a programmer. DJ is the son of some of the company presidents. And they're doing tons of work. The machine works as it did in the original 80s. But my point being, that community, a lot of that work is happening on the vcfed.org forum. We'd love to see anyone come out there and join us. If you have a machine that we haven't talked about, we'd love to have you come and tell us about it. We really want to get more people involved. That's a big thing that I focus on, is trying to bring other people into the vintage hobby. When I was a kid, because I'm a 70s kid, vintage computing was very much a select small group of people, because computers were very expensive, and you probably had to have a parent who was involved in computing to even know there was a thing to be interested in. So we very much want to change that. We want to bring everyone in and show people, especially young people who are far too young to have touched any of this equipment, why you might be interested. One being the fact that if you look at modern machines, if you like the iPhone that's in my pocket, or an Android for any of that, it's an incredibly complex machine. I have a lot of experience. I've been working on Unix for 30 plus years, and I work for Red Hat. But there's no way that I can understand the entirety of that system. It's far too complicated. One person generally cannot. But
or Red Hat.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Well, I like the Fedora shirt.
Yeah.
But yeah. So On the other hand, our vintage machines, even something like this Centurion, this beautiful Centurion that's sitting here, you can understand this. You can look, the schematics are often available. You know, the talk earlier was talking about how the restoration has been done, the incredible work Dave has been doing on that. It's absolutely incredible. I've been watching, absolutely wrapped all of his videos on that. But you can really understand the whole system. You can take any system that you may be interested in. My first home PC was a Commodore 64, but it could be an Atari 800, it could be Nintendo Entertainment System, or any of those systems. You can definitely understand the whole thing, and you can do something interesting with it. It's not complicated, and it's a great way to get started in programming because you don't have to write thousands of lines of code in order to get started and make these machines do something. A little bit of code will go a very long way. And it's great to help people understand it, and they understand the connection better to the hardware, I think, with these vintage machines. Because if you think about it, when I do coding on a modern system, and I do something, I'm likely working on virtualization or cloud system or container or something like that, is so far distant from the hardware it's sitting on that a lot of folks kind of think of cloud computing as like there is no hardware. And of course there is, but you're so divorced from it that it doesn't really matter. So but when you look at these machines, the hardware really does matter. Even if you're working in a high-level language like BASIC or something like that, the underlying hardware makes such a difference. So one of the advantages of working on these vintage machines, even for those who didn't grow up with them, is the ability to touch that hardware and to get the joy of seeing, you know, you type the little program and it actually does something. It's one thing that really gives me passion about doing this sort of thing. And I hope most folks will come and join us. Both here, first of all, there's a wonderful meetup at this Dallas Makerspace. I live in Maryland, the mountains of western Maryland, but I've come down here, I think this is my 4th time, and it's because y'all have a great meetup group here, and I really enjoy coming and seeing it. There's a great community around here, and hopefully more folks will come down and join. For anyone who doesn't know, it is based at the Dallas Makerspace, and I believe it is every 3 months, I believe, or the meetup. Quarterly. Yeah, so it's a really wonderful event, so definitely check the website, I believe, and definitely come out and take a look. Also, we do discuss these do get brought up on VintageComputerFederation.org, VCFed.org. We try to have a calendar of almost every event that's out there we're aware of. So if there's an event that you're planning or your group is doing that you'd like us to advertise, please tell us. We will advertise for anyone. There's no competition. We want to see everyone succeed. We really just want this to be a great community. And that's really what it is. That's what it's all about. I'll close in saying a little bit about me. As I said, my name is Alexander Jaycox. I started working with computing with Unix in 1992. My first system, Unix System 5, on actually a Wang system, one of the very few non-word processing systems they ever sold. That's how I got started, and then I was lucky enough in 1992 to be involved in the creation of Linux. So very soon after it initially came out, I got a hold of one of the earliest distributions called SLS, or Soft Landing Systems, and I ran it on my home PCs because it was the first thing that a person who at the time, I was a high school student, could actually afford and could run on hardware that I could scrape together. So very quickly I found the community was amazing and I was able to get involved, and that's produced my career in computing. That's how I've been involved. So I'd love to see more people get involved in whatever form it takes, and come join us. Thank you very much. It just meant to be a quick presentation. If y'all have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Go ahead.
You said Southwest, right?
Yes.
Is there
Well, I didn't say it, but other people.
I'm sorry, but he told me.
Okay.
And I'm asking.
I asked the meetup folks. I believe there is something, but I don't have the information. I'm not the organizer for that. But ask the folks here. Likely, I think there is, and I think there may be information coming soon. Again, I'm not the official spokesperson, but yeah, I believe there is. Yep.
I can't wait to go.
Yeah, no kidding. No, me too. I will be here, so there's no question. As soon as it's announced, I will be here. I do also suggest check out VCF Midwest in Chicago. It's a bit of a drive from here, but it's really amazing for anyone who hasn't been. It's basically, have you been? It's kind of a
first one.
party. It's truly amazing. So it's a great community. VCF East, where I'm involved, we do more of like, if you think about a science fair, that's how we put it on. We have demos and speakers and things like that. VCF Midwest is more hang out with your friends, look at cool technology, hack on things, create new things, and just have fun for several days in the hotel. So it's really fun. It's very relaxed for our first event. VCF East is also a great one. As I said, come check us out. It's a long way from y'all here in Texas, but we'd love to have you come.
All right.
Yep. Other questions? Anybody? Well, if anyone on the phone has a question, I can't hear you. So ask me on vcfed.org. Thanks very much.
If they're on the chat.
Oh, if they are questions, great.
Any CDTV yet?
Oh, we're having fun in the.
Yes.
This guy now, awesome.
Yeah, well, actually, we have a lot of Amiga enthusiasts, even if the folks will say the CDTV is not an Amiga, because Commodore didn't call it that, but it's still an amazing machine. They're definitely enthusiasts. I am an Amiga owner myself. As I said, my first home PC was a Commodore 64. I still have Amigas. I like everything. Biggest thing.
There's an Amiga club that meets up here monthly.
I know, I've seen the sign. I've never been here when they've done it.
Ah, drat. Well, it's coming up on the 11th.
Yep. Hopefully I'll be able to make it.
Okay, cool.
Do you have any questions you want to ask? I talked about DCF, I talked about the forum, I talked about all the events that I'm aware of. And
Probably offline if we sign an NDA. No, I'm kidding.
yeah, of course. But yeah, as I said, glad to virtually meet everyone here, glad to see everyone. We had an incredible turnout. I don't even know how many people do you think were here today? Maybe 100 people or so?
Yeah, it'd be close, I'm sure.
It's incredible. So again, there's some really neat things being shown. You should come take a look. There's a really amazing HP programmable calculator. I don't know what the date on that is. Probably 82, 83, I'm guessing, maybe 81.
I haven't had a chance to look in the exhibit room.
Yeah,
to be honest.
yeah, David brought up his
Oh,
calculator.
that was the 1968.
Oh, 68, okay,
9100,
far
yeah.
there. That's an amazing machine.
Yeah.
So there's really amazing things being shown here. I mentioned the Nabu. I mentioned that. There's a ton of, there's Unix-based equipment in the other room. There's a guy who has built his own clone of the ZX Spectrum called the Harlequin. It's an open source kit. It's available. And really amazing stuff. So come take a look and say hi to everybody. So thank you.
Cool. Yeah, well, we're going to cease the stream right here. Thanks to all of our speakers, and thanks for you all for joining us, and we hope to see you at some point in the near future. Until then, Texas Warehouse saying bye, y'all. Cool. Bink.
Good job.
Bink.